came in the middle of the night.
Where you at?
Large flames stomping over the dry brush in California's wine country, sparking this evacuation of the homes in between the vineyards.
Go, 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 go! Drive!
My kids woke up at the time, screaming and yelling. Fire alarm was going off.
By the time the sun rose, some 36,000 acres and 22 human lives were gone. Soon, one company would be responsible for paying damages for this and other deadly fires.
So this used to be your house down here?
Yes, it was really a beautiful area to live. A lot of the things that attracted us to this home, moving from New York, the dry, warm climate of California, has ended up being detriments in terms of the fire itself.
Sheriff's office!
My name is Will Abrams. I am a wildfire survivor from the 2017 PG&E Tubbs fire.
PG&E's most important responsibility is the safety of our customers and communities.
PG&E is the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, one of America's most powerful utilities, serving more than 5.5 million customers.
You specifically call it the PG&E Tubbs fire.
Yes, I do, because I think the evidence is clear that PG&E caused the Tubbs fire.
PG&E claims they didn't start the Tubbs fire, yet they settled with the victims. And it's not just this one fire. The Pacific Gas and Electric Company is now obligated to pay the victims of all of these California wildfires.
And you have to remember that PG&E actually pleaded guilty to 84 felony counts of involuntary manslaughter over the Camp Fire, the deadliest wildfire in California history.
To sort through all of these wildfires and who's responsible, we spoke to San Francisco Chronicle reporter J.D. Morris.
How does a electric company cause a wildfire?
It can happen in two key ways.
Number one, when heavy winds knock a tree or one of its branches into a high power line, the resulting sparks can cause a wildfire. Or number two, when an old piece of equipment fails on one of those long distance power lines, those sparks can also start a wildfire. And that is what happened in 2018. One old clip broke and a whole city burned to the ground.
This was in Paradise.
That was the Paradise Fire, yes.
During that time, PG&E was already on criminal probation following a deadly blast.
That stems from the 2010 San Bruno gas pipeline explosion.
During that probation, power lines owned by PG&E, a company owned in part by Wall Street investors, started more deadly wildfires. And while facing criminal conviction and billions of dollars in cleanup costs, PG&E filed for bankruptcy protection, while homeowners were struggling to rebuild.
We're having all of these fires, but investors are still getting their return over and over again.
The bankruptcy court set up a pile of money once valued at $13.5 billion to be shared by about 70,000 fire victims. Story over, right? Well, not quite. Turns out a lot of people get a cut from that pile.
A lot of this money is going to lawyers who brokered this very flawed settlement in the first place.
When Marketplace senior business reporter Lily Jamali went digging into the numbers, the money was going in lots of directions, not just to the people who lost their homes.
These victims will never get 100% of what they lost, of what they are owed.
No one expects to get 100%. If there was 100%, they wouldn't be in bankruptcy.
This is the man handing out the checks, retired California Justice Jack Trotter. As head of the Victims Fund, he moves money from the electric company to the fire victims. And it's a complicated job since many homeowners had their documents burn up in a wildfire. And for that work, Justice Trotter collects a salary of $125,000 each month since July 2020.
That's my salary.
So is that coming out of the Victims Fund, though?
Where else would it come out of? I mean, there was no separate fund set up by the court to pay the expenses.
Some of the victims that we've talked to have felt that that's an enormous amount of money to be making every single month, and while they're waiting to get into their homes, which are still a concrete slab.
I understand. It was an agreed upon figure.
Between you and the bankruptcy judge.
Well, it was approved by the judge. Everything goes through the judge.
For them to understand.
Put that in context.
Yes.
I'm running a $13.5 billion fund.
Yeah.
$13.5 billion fund. My salary is minuscule.
The longer you drag this out, the more these claims administrators can claim in pay and expenses.
And there's not an inexhaustible supply of money.
No, every dollar that's spent on administration is a dollar that's not given to a fire victim to rebuild their home or rebuild their lives.
And if we keep doing that, fire after fire, disaster after disaster, we're never going to find our way out of this.
Nearly 3 years after the Tubbs fire, Will Abrams' home in Santa Rosa, California still looks like this. He's still waiting for that settlement money.
Can you explain what the bottleneck is here?
Well, I don't think there's a bottleneck. I think what happened was PG&E went into bankruptcy. That delayed everything for 19 months.
And the payouts, when there have been payouts, aren't entirely checks you can cash. It's half cash and half PG&E stock.
This deal has not been a very good one for fire victims.
So let me get this straight. The people who were victims of this fire got stock from the company that was proven to have caused the fire at their own house?
It's an astounding outcome. The company that hurt them, that killed their loved ones, that destroyed their homes, to having that compensation tethered to that same company.
Have you ever seen a bankruptcy case that is tied to stock like this?
No, never. I hope I never see one in the future. I mean, just the emotional component of that is hard.
And you're tied to the ups and downs of that as well.
And they're tied to, they have to root for PG&E to do well. It's been very difficult for the victims to live with that. Can you imagine?
We victims should not have to choose between, are you going to get fair settlement for your property, or are we going to work to address our climate?
And there it is, the question that is in the background of all of this. How much money should go to rebuilding the houses, and how much money should go to rebuilding the power grid, making it less vulnerable to a changing climate?
Oh, wow, look at this going up right here. You can see how fast this tree is burning right in front of us.
Wildfire experts have seen it up close.
So you've seen the fire seasons lasting longer, droughts are longer, the fires are burning hotter. Is that something you'll see in the future as well?
Yeah, we're preparing for it. Things will burn hotter. The fires will be more aggressive. The tactics will have to be changed in order to combat those fires. So longer seasons inherently mean more extreme fire behavior.
PG&E for years resisted calls to bury more power lines underground because they said it's just too expensive.
How to fix all this going forward is a question so big, I had to go to Washington to talk to the top levels of government. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm.
Let's talk about power companies. PG&E in California, for example, they've been to blame for some deadly wildfires. How do you get these companies to invest in a new kind of grid, even though it's going to cost them billions of dollars, without passing that along to the customer?
I mean, that's really why the president is really committed to making sure that energy costs don't go up to the extent we can control it from investments in the grid.
So there's going to be some money coming from the government to these companies so they don't have to raise power bills.
Right. So we can partner to build out in a way that makes the grid resilient.
That's why it was so important to pass the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I thank my Republican friends.
President Biden says part of the $1.2 trillion investment will make the grid better. But victims of the PG&E fires aren't holding their breath.
Instead of investing in the infrastructure, instead of doing the types of mitigations that they should have done, they wanted to maximize the amount of money that went to shareholders.
PG&E, based here in San Francisco, declined an on-camera interview. Instead, they forwarded us a press release from February of this year. It reads, in part, PG&E plans to underground at least 175 miles of power lines this year, approximately approximately 3,600 by 2026. They also say they'll take a look at the lines running through fire zones, and these 6 Northern California counties are holding them to it. Just days ago, PG&E agreed to yet another multi-million-dollar settlement, and as long as they pay up, the company won't face criminal charges for the recent Dixie and Kincaid fires.
How do you criminally charge a corporation?
It's a good question. You can do it. Obviously, a corporation can't go to prison, though.
The company has pleaded guilty to these crimes, but no person has ever been held individually accountable.
Which may blow some viewers' minds when they hear that a corporation can plead guilty to manslaughter and nobody spends one day behind bars for this.
It begs the question, how many fires is enough?
PG&E has opened a new 24-hour operations center, the heart of the new Community Wildfire Safety Program.
The company itself has been around for 117 years, and this rusted clip, the one that snapped and started the campfire, was also nearly a century old when that disaster killed more than 80 people.
More than that, yeah. 85 includes one man that took his life, unfortunately, as the fire approached. But yeah.
Just because of that one rusted out little piece.
Correct.
So who's really responsible here? Was it the person who installed the clip nearly 100 years ago? Some hypothetical inspectors decades later who never noticed it starting to corrode? The person in charge when the clip finally broke in 2018? Or the current CEO who wasn't even working for the company when all of this happened? There are no easy answers.
We need to take those things into account. PG&E going away is certainly an appropriate response, but getting rid of PG&E is only as good an option if you know what there is to replace it. What I worry about is the bad precedent that was set is going to start to affect future wildfire survivors and how they're able to recover.
With every passing moment, that pile of money is getting smaller. Some homeowners are slowly getting paid, but so are the lawyers and the administrators, all as wildfire seasons are getting longer and more intense.
But PG&E can't wash their hands of this and say, well, it's just because of climate.
When you're the largest electric company of its kind in America, running power over some of the driest land in America, any tiny spark can start a wildfire and future power outrage.